Hey, welcome back to Midas Letter Live. You might recognize my next guest. Most everybody does in the cannabis industry these days. Cam Battley is the Chief Corporate Officer of Aurora Cannabis. Cam, welcome back.
It's nice to see you, James. I love the brand new decorative old-timey microphones.
Yes, these are actually stashes and vaporizers because we're getting ready. Now that cannabis is legal,
yes,
you're going to be able to tune this up, put in your favorite vape cartridge, and
well,
right off the top.
I hope you have some Aurora stuff in here.
Well, I hope we do too, because now that it's legal, you guys can bring free samples and we can try it live on the air, which I don't know if you've met my sidekick, Ed Molesky, who's currently golfing in Scotland right now on one of the world's oldest golf courses. We are planning to sample product live on the air.
Live on the air, really?
Live on the air!
I will tune in for that, I'll tell you.
Cam, I can't wait. Let's cut to the chase, though.
Yes.
Aurora has made some incredible moves. I mean, I keep saying to you, let's do another interview. You keep saying, well, let's wait a bit because we got something big that's going to be announced. Let's talk after that.
Yeah.
I wait, boom, you announce something. I asked you to come on. You say, well, wait a sec, we've got another big thing coming on. So I think the last time we spoke, you had just announced MedRelief.
Yes.
And so there's been a few things happening since then.
Yes, we've been busy. We've done some more acquisitions. We've made more progress with our facilities. We've set an analyst and investor day for people to come in and take a look at Aurora Sky and the modern marvel that is.
So anybody who is in Toronto,
we would have a hard time getting that facility to Toronto.
Yes, or them to Aurora or to Aurora Sky in time, right? Yeah. Okay, so I want to start with a conversation about your announcement that you're going to issue shares and warrants of your subsidiary Australis Capital to shareholders of record of Aurora.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that?
Well, so there are a couple of things. One, we're divesting. That's the headline. We're divesting U.S. assets. Now, they weren't threatening to our listing on the TSX because they don't touch the plant and they were not operational. But if we want to have U.S. assets that at some point will become operational, we've got to spin it off and divest. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we will no longer own those assets, and instead we're doing something really interesting. We're giving them essentially to our shareholders. So the shareholders will receive a share and a 25-cent warrant in this new company, Australis Capital, that we're creating.
Wow,
and we're hoping that will make them happy.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a shareholder.
Well, I think I might be. Does this mean that Aurora is abandoning any sort of pretense towards a U.S. strategy? Because that is somewhat of the perception.
No, what we're doing is we are abiding very closely by the guidelines from the TSX. They've made it very clear they don't want companies in Canada, in the cannabis industry, involved with operations that touch the plant in the U.S. And so that's why we're making it super clear that we're divesting. We're not going to own any assets at Aurora. Now, that said, the way we're structuring this is with a potential back-in right. So if the regulatory oversight, if the regulatory guidelines in the U.S. change over time, we will have an option to come back in. But for the time being, it's incredibly important that this company be completely separate from Aurora, operate separately, have a separate board and a separate management, and that's what we've done.
Very cool. Well, I'm curious as to why the name Australis if it's all about the United States.
What do you know about Aurora? Have you ever heard about the Aurora Borealis?
Well, okay, so this is the southern Aurora Australis.
Yeah, so you got it. Yeah, so the Aurora Borealis is the northern lights. Aurora Australis.
There's nothing quick about me, Cam. Don't worry, I will never spring anything on you like that. That's, of course, that didn't even occur to me. Boom, right over my head. Okay, the other bigger thing that, to me, was a bigger thing was the fact that you took over Anandia Labs.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that so? There's no better science company, no better cannabis science company in Canada, and maybe nowhere in the world than Anandia. And they were so highly respected, not only for their testing and the accuracy and independence of their testing, which we have guaranteed will remain, but also for their deep cannabis science. The genetic science and so on, and that's a path we think to intellectual property, an area that we're investing a lot more in these days than we have in the past.
You bet. And so in combination with CanAmed, it would look like you are really creating a scientific division that sort of stands completely apart from the business of cannabis, apart from the fact that it's all about cannabis science.
So Aurora was already highly advanced in cannabis science, doing work with, for example, plant tissue culture or micropropagation and a number of other things. Now, of course, we've added Canamed and their science, and we are in the process, assuming that we close the acquisition with MedRelief, of doing it with them as well. And now we're layering on top of all of that the science of Anandia. We couldn't be happier. We think this positions us as perhaps the strongest cannabis science company in the world.
Yeah. So is it safe to conclude, sort of, or infer rather, that the combination of Canamed and
You used
Anandia...
infer correctly. Very well done.
Well, thank you. I don't know how that happened.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day, Cam. So would I infer from that relationship with the Canamed and the Anandia and the Aurora combination that there is something developing on the scientific side that is not yet apparent?
Do we have a conscious strategy that is evolving, and will we have more to say about that this year? Yes, in fact.
Okay.
Yes.
That's as close as I'm going to get to that, I gather. Okay, so the other thing that was interesting to me is that you were $7 million of a $10 million ACMPR applicant?
Yeah, with some lovely branding.
Lovely branding. Okay,
Yeah.
So that was the attraction, was the branding.
It was part of the attraction, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
was the other part Chris Bogart, the CEO? Because I happen to know Chris, he's a good friend of mine.
Yes, in fact, we've heard nothing but good about him,
Yeah.
and so the talks with them went very smoothly. So we're very keen on Jim.
Yeah, cool. And so is that kind of like an extension of the idea that you're going to acquire other brands and or product lines that are going to help Aurora offer a broad range of cannabis products to both the recreational and the medical side around the world?
That's a pretty comprehensive question. So is that a sign? Yes, we're going to be involved, obviously, on the medical side. We've made a major commitment to that. And you know that the largest economic opportunity in the cannabis sector is the international medical opportunity with this cascade of new medical systems being introduced in Europe and elsewhere. And of course, you know, we've made a very strong commitment to having a solid and robust and respected brand on the consumer side here in Canada, and we have been ramping up really hard to be ready for consumer legalization here. And by the way, I can't believe we're this deep into the interview without acknowledging what happened this week.
What happened?
Something about cannabis legalization in Canada.
Oh, is it finally happened?
Yeah, it's actually finally happened.
Last night, the Senate finally approved the third reading.
There you go.
But was royal assent given by the House? I wasn't clear on that.
Not yet, and royal assent is actually done by the Governor General. So we're anticipating that, I would think, tomorrow.
So technically it's not quite legal yet.
Technically it's not, and in fact it won't be quite legal until it's actually implemented.
Right.
Now we have to publish the regulations in the Canada Gazette, and the federal government wants to give the provincial governments a little bit of extra time to get ready, but I think we're still anticipating looking at implementation in the second half of September, which is pretty cool. We're changing the world.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, so how would you respond at this point to all of the naysayers who say, we're not ready, Chicken Little, the sky is falling?
Of course we're ready. I mean, it's not like we're inventing cannabis use in this country.
Right.
Canada has one of the highest rates of cannabis use in the world, so when I hear people say, oh my God, the sky is going to fall, well, it hasn't been falling for the last several decades. So all we're doing with consumer legalization is something that is really smart from a public policy perspective. We're moving from a vast and sophisticated black market that's spread across the country into a legal and regulated market that's going to be safer for everybody involved. It's going to be better for our youth. It's going to be better for public health and safety. Oh, and by the way, it opens up huge economic opportunities for companies in this sector. So you're seeing massive investment, economic development, employment growth, and innovation. And it positions Canada as the world leader in this space so that we can, you have to say this in an evil voice, take over the world. Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say to the criticism generally levied by, let's just say, unlicensed participants in the system that the existing recreational supply of, call it 450,000 kilograms per year, has been serviced since the 60s successfully by a black market that, as you say, is sophisticated and robust? Is the government actually going to use the C-45 legislation to shut down those guys, or is there a potential for cohabitation somehow that is not going to undermine the balance sheet or the investment thesis of the recreational revenue argument?
So I gather you're going to have Prime Minister Trudeau on your show next week.
Well,
and perhaps he can answer those questions.
He wanted to be on this week, but I had you coming. So,
so I mean, I'm joking, but I'm not. I mean, The issue here is one of public policy from the government's perspective, and we're working within that public policy environment. One thing that I do think is important, and I've spoken about this extensively, is that we are creating a new market for regulated companies like Aurora, but I would like to see, as much as possible, the opportunity to bring the people who come from the cannabis culture, the people who are currently involved in the cannabis culture, perhaps those who have been involved for quite some time. I'd like to see room for them made in the legal business. And to that end, we've spoken about the monopoly systems put up by some of the governments in Quebec and Ontario and elsewhere. And that there should be some room made for people who have traditionally been involved in the cannabis business, people from the culture. That's a repository of tremendous knowledge and passion for the plant. And wouldn't it be great to actually lift these people up into the legitimate market rather than shut them out and say you're not welcome?
Wow. That's uplifting.
You look astonished.
There. Well, that's just such a refreshing approach that I have not
Aurora's
quite
different.
heard.
Aurora's very different. We have a unique hybrid culture that we're very, very proud of. You do have, people have heard me say it before, you've got suits like me, and we have a number of our executives and managers who come from mature industries. But what makes us special is that we're combined with people who come from the cannabis culture, people who work in our operations, in our customer care, in our regulatory side. And that brings a lot of energy and sense of mission and passion into the company. And I think that that's one of the things that distinguishes Aurora and makes us different.
Interesting. Cam, I'm going to leap over to YouTube now because we've started talking to our audience in real time. They like it. I like it.
Because this is live.
This is live, and now people really believe it's
and
live.
And if I start dropping F-bombs, they're going to go out there.
Well, we've experimented with that. And, there's just something about time and place that it just doesn't work for us. But an individual, I don't know who this individual is. They go by the handle on YouTube of Freedom Unleashed.
Oh, okay.
A very positive and persistent participant in our audience. So I'm always eager to answer whatever questions that he, she, they, it comes up with. His question, her question potentially, will MedRelief holders get the warrants from the new Australian branch or only Aurora holders? I'm assuming they're referring to Australis.
Australis Capital.
Right.
We haven't announced the timing as to when we're going to be making that move. We also haven't announced the timing yet as to when we anticipate moving on to the CSE. So that's up in the air for the time being.
Okay. Another question from a person who goes under the handle XJesterSX. XJestersX.
It must be great to have to read out these internet names.
It's like I've got to read it, but I've got to kind of pre-read it before I read it because sometimes they contain some booby traps. But this looks pretty tame. XJestersX wants to say, or ask rather, once the Aurora's acquisition of MedRelief is complete, will patients under both platforms get access to the full product offering under both entities, or will they still have to register separately?
Yeah, the answer is yes. In fact, we're in the process of doing the same thing with Canamed right now. So the intention is to be able to offer, I think it's somewhere between 50 and 60 different products from Aurora and Canamed, and ultimately, if we're successful in closing MedRelief, across the board, making them all easily available to all our patients. That should be a significant advantage to our patients.
Okay, and here's one for, not to leave out Facebook. Andrew Kittle wants to know how the new Aurora Frost is selling.
Like hotcakes. So Aurora Frost, just to explain, is what we call fine-trimmed cannabis. It's also more colloquially known as keef, and it's the crystals, the trichomes of the cannabinoids.
Oh.
And so what we've done is we've come up with an innovative and successful method of creating this product without any chemical change to the product itself, because that's prohibited by Health Canada regulations. You're not allowed to make any chemical change to the dried cannabis in order for it to be
We used
dried
to call
cannabis.
that green crack. Is it this, like, it's basically pure trichomes?
It's essentially that's what it is, and I'm astonished at the depth of your knowledge here. And I'd love to hear sometime how you came about
I'm
it.
sure we'll have many of those conversations, but did you bring any of that with you? I guess not.
No.
Jeff Shee, one of our other regular guests, or rather audience members on Facebook, just commented that Mr. Trudeau just announced that the rules will kick in October 17th, 2018.
Okay.
Now, my audience members are not known for distributing disinformation. I'm taking that straight at face value, but I'm assuming he's absolutely right. But that's interesting. So October, just in time for Halloween. I know what I'm going to dress up as.
Just as long as you're not distributing candies to the kids.
That's right. Cameron, awesome as usual. Let's leave it there. We'll come back to you as soon as we can. Sure. Wish you the best of luck, and thank you for your input today.
Thanks, James.
And now we're... Hey there, welcome back to Midas Letter Live. My guest this segment is Matt Bottomley. He's an equities analyst at Canaccord Genuity. Matt, welcome back.
Nice to see you again, James.
Matt, let's dive right into the cannabis sector. We're now in a recreational legal environment in Canada, though the Senate passed the third reading with 40 amendments. Mm-hmm. Do those 40 amendments mean that we are actually not quite into the legal cannabis or the recreational cannabis era yet?
Yeah, technically we're not, but I think this is more procedural or logistical. So basically what's going to happen, and I believe part of this has already occurred, those 40 amendments go back down to the House. The House has their say on them. I believe they okayed 26 of them. It then goes back up to the Senate for royal assent. If the Senate wishes to, kick dirt up on any of the 14 or so that they didn't pass, it could go a bit back and forth between the Senate and the House. But my understanding is it's going to be, a matter of weeks before this is officially legal. That doesn't mean we're going to see legalized sales. I still think there's a lot of other logistical hurdles to go over when it comes to provincial implementation. Sure. But we're at the goal line. We're 99% there with respect to this being a legal rec market.
You bet. So then, assuming that timeline unfolds, when do we expect to see recreational marijuana available generally?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a window here. We're hearing, first we heard July 1, now we're hearing summer, then late summer. I think most licensed producers that I'm familiar with, that I've talked to and that I cover, are expecting to facilitate delivery of a lot of product in September. So I would expect by October we should see a lot of the product rolling out in stores all over the country. I think each province is going to obviously have their own challenges in ramping it out. Some will be faster than others, but I think the first legal sale could happen maybe in August if it's an online platform somewhere, because there are a lot of online platforms rolling out in Canada. But I think that when we're talking about the legal market being fully ramped up, it's years away. In terms of it being generally available, I would say October.
Okay. Do you think that the valuations currently in the marketplace among the large caps, are they being negatively or positively impacted? It looks like the index is more or less in a sort of a drift pattern. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what we saw leading up to the legislation or the vote on June 7th was a lot of the valuations running up to that date. I don't have the specifics here with me, but I think it was something like 4 or 5 sessions in a row we saw, maybe 4 or 5% day over day for a lot of the names. And then we saw maybe it trade off a little bit the day after, and now you're right, it's been a little bit in flux, but generally at the current levels. I think over the next little while there's going to be some positive catalysts. We're still waiting on British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario to announce who the winners of the tender process and potentially pricing. I personally think Shoppers Drug Mart is going to announce something soon. I know they're gearing up to be an online distributor of the medical cannabis. So I think there's a lot of positive catalysts to come. I think the larger players are fairly valued in many cases. Some cases I think it's a bit lofty, but it's really hard, as we've talked before in the past, of where to apply the fundamentals, because I think if you're just trying to take the domestic fundamentals that come out of Canada, it's very hard to support a lot of valuations. But when you look at some of the larger companies in the space, the Canopies, et cetera, a lot of the larger cap names, they have a lot of fish hooks in the water in international markets, and it's very difficult to guess which markets are going to roll out and when, and what the pricing might be, and what competition will be internationally. So I don't think the larger cap names are necessarily overvalued right now, but I think you have to keep a discerning eye. And I do think that there's going to be challenges in rolling out this market province by province. I don't think we're going to have, a lot of estimates, mine included, say, the regulated market closer to maturity is 10 billion. Mm-hmm. That's not happening anytime soon. You need enough storefronts, you need online platforms, you need capacity expansion. So it's going to take a while before that happens, and I would be cautious about valuations sort of in the back end of this year, early 2019.
Okay, so we're going to avoid a conversation about most of the large cap companies that you cover at this point, because there's too much going on for you to be able to talk about them comfortably.
That's true. We're research restricted on a number of them, or it wouldn't be a fair conversation. Okay. But
well, let's talk about some of the more recent ones that have gone public. Mm-hmm. The one that you just told me about that I hadn't actually heard of before was Green Thumb Industries. What's the story with them?
Well, Green Thumb Industries is a very interesting story. My favorite company in the space historically that I cover and currently is Ianthus Capital Holding, and that's a company that has exposure to a lot of blue chip states. So Green Thumb is very similar. They just recently got some exposure in Florida. They're in a lot of states in the Northeast. So really what that is a lot of bigger players are coming to market now that are able to raise capital in Canada and potentially become consolidators in the U.S. space. And that's something that historically has been a huge challenge. Most states, particularly California, which is the largest market in the U.S., are incredibly disaggregated. So we're seeing a lot of companies come to market now. Green Thumb is another example of one. MPX is another one I've mentioned that really are going to have strong balance sheets, ability to raise capital, and they're going to be picking up what I think are blue chip licenses in states where they're risk mitigated because there's, maybe not license caps, but certainly there's visibility on how much licensing is going to happen, as opposed to Canada, which only has 35 million people. It's not as vertically integrated as the US because the governments are getting involved on the retail side, and there's not as much competition in terms of the number of, publicly listed companies on the US. That's changing. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting stories come to market in the second half of this year, and Green Thumb is just the most recent one.
Okay, so who's behind Green Thumb? Is it anybody from the industry that we'd recognize? Well,
I don't know. There's so many different people in this space. They definitely are experienced over the years. A lot of these companies stayed private for some time. But yeah, I'm not sure if you know them directly, but it is a good operating team that has exposure in many different states.
Okay, well, let's talk about another U.S. consolidator that's come to market recently. MedMed, trading on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol MMEN. What can you tell me about MedMed?
So MedMed's an interesting story. It probably has some of the most exposure right now with respect to all of these names that are in the pipeline that are U.S. operators but Canadian listed. So a lot of the companies I just mentioned are companies that have vertically integrated licenses, and MedMed has that as well, but they probably have the biggest retail presence right now in the U.S., particularly in Los Angeles and other areas of California. So they've probably done the best job from what I've seen in terms of operators that are able to get, I say blue chip licenses. These would be double blue chip real estate in terms of, having sites in West Hollywood, having sites on Manhattan. Right now in New York State, for example, there's only, I think, 2 licenses in terms of dispensaries that are on Manhattan, and MedMed has one of them. They recently entered Florida. They're planning on getting a South Beach location there. So they really are, I think, a leader right now in terms of the pole positioning as to who has the best brand when it comes to the retail dispensary model in the U.S. The question is, where's the best part of the value chain to be? Is it to have the cultivation, production, and retail like MedMed has? Is it to be maybe a distributor in California like a company like Canna Royalty is? So I think MedMed's a company that has a lot of execution to do in order to get to where they're planning to be, but they certainly are the leader right now when it comes to the retail brand for publicly available investments.
Okay, now let's touch on one that's actually been sort of really amping up in market cap and valuation and increased interest, and that's one where we were both present for their sort of show and tell day, Organogram Holdings.
Yeah, so Organogram is a great company. It's got a great management team. I've been doing some facility tours more recently. I went to Aphria as well, and I looked at a lot of these companies when I was first initiating coverage on them early in 2017. And what I saw at Aphria, what I saw at Organogram, it's night and day. I mean, just the level of capacity that's been expanded, the level of automation that we've seen, the number of grow rooms, which I know you saw as well. So Organogram is definitely one of the leaders in the Canadian industry. When we're talking about 107 licenses, maybe 30 or 40 operating companies, there's certainly a top 10 name when it comes to all the metrics of infrastructure, geographic reach, cost of production. And I think that relatively speaking, it's a very cheap stock compared to some of the larger cap names that have much higher relative multiples. So very impressed with their ad. I don't know if this is, I got to be careful here because I'm sort of speaking off the hip here, but I do think Organogram might have a top 5 facility in terms of how large it is today. There's a lot of competition in this space, don't get me wrong, but Organogram is certainly, since Greg Engel's come on, has been executing very, very, very well, and it's a name I'm very favorable on.
Great. I was impressed as well. One of the big questions that a lot of people are asking about is the idea that there's going to be this huge shortage of legal cannabis in the face of the onset of recreational use by pretty much everybody. And I'm curious as to, if we look at this map that I'm putting up now on the screen, these are all the illegal dispensaries in Toronto that are currently servicing the recreational market.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Okay, that's reassuring. Yeah. But I mean, I just look at this map, and most of these companies, well, you can either walk in and buy recreational cannabis today without fear of being arrested because of the constitutional quagmire that implies in the face of a newly legalized environment. But are all these guys just going to disappear? And is the new recreational rules the sort of the framework under which the government will shut these guys down? What's sort of your position on that?
Well, because this is a map of the GTA and therefore Ontario, I do think that. I mean, these dispensaries, for the most part, do not have the... Now, the Canadian market to start is going to be a little bit shy when it comes to how much product breadth they have, but these dispensaries do not have the product breadth that we're going to see in a regulated market, particularly if you compare it to what we've seen in a lot of U.S. states. I've been to dispensaries all over the U.S., probably 5 or 6 states now, and when you look at a fully ramped up recreational dispensary, it's nothing compared to what's in here. These stores will sell little jars of dried bud, maybe 1 or 2 cartridges with oil in it, maybe someone in the back room makes the edibles, I don't really know, but the provincial and federal government have basically said, no, they haven't acted on it, that once I think it was the first or second reading of the bill went through in Congress, that these dispensaries are effectively on notice. And I don't think you're going to ramp up a large infrastructure, LCBO type models in Ontario and let those dispensaries that are illegal compete for tax dollars with you. So I fully expect there to be enforcement. I'm actually a little surprised it hasn't happened yet.
Really? Okay, so then you don't think that there's a risk that these guys try to stay in business, the feds try to shut them down, there's constitutional challenges from that quarter saying, well, if these guys can do it, why can't we do it if it's generally legal?
I think it's certainly a risk, but I think the provinces, at least I would hope, are aware of this risk, and they should be pricing the product accordingly in the retail stores to ensure that they're not competing on price with these illicit organizations. I think that if price is not a consideration, and this is a big if, Ontario is able to get their 40 stores to start and then up to their 150, and they have brick and mortar access where it's not inconvenient to find a legalized store, I would think, price being the same, you're going to want to buy something that's regulated. There's no fentanyl or pesticides or any other garbage in your product, and again, it's in a regulated environment you can be comfortable with. So I absolutely think the illicit market's going to be here for a very, very long time. I don't think it's going away in the next handful of years, let alone next year. But certainly the regulated market should start chipping away at it almost immediately, assuming that the provinces roll this out in an effective and responsible way.
Right. All right, Matt, that's fascinating and enlightening as usual. Thank you very much for joining me today. We'll come back to you again in due course.
Thank you.
All right, stay with me. How about that? Matt Bottomley, the original millennial cannabis market analyst. Another soon-to-be famous millennial president of a publicly traded company, Micron Waste, is with me now. Alfred Wong, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
Alfred, we've talked about Micron Waste before, and you mentioned that you had done a deal with Aurora Cannabis, and you sold them a cannabis Micron Waste processor. Now you've delivered it.
We're actually about to deliver the first cannabis waste digester to Aurora Mountain, and that's happening the end of June.
Okay.
And it's essentially going to be the world's first cannabis waste solution that not only takes care of the active pharmaceutical compounds within the waste streams, but also recycles the water back into their cultivation process, making it a complete closed-loop system.
Okay, so the benefits superficially are somewhat obvious. Less water consumption for the producer implies that there'll be less of a resource hit on the water supply. In California, that's obviously got tremendous implications. And then I guess, what are the other benefits? Like, why would a cannabis producer care about processing their waste through your device?
Well, you could kind of think of it from a corporate social responsibility angle. Many of the licensed producers out there are really focused on their branding and to be able to think in the interest of public safety and environmental protection of how to mitigate the concerns of potential THC or CBD being discharged into the environment or to neighbors or to other facilities in the area.
Okay, so then besides we don't want fish getting high as a result of being downstream from a marijuana plant, the savings in water, how significant is it?
Right now, we don't have the numbers yet, according to our calculations, and we will have to know once we optimize and calibrate the system when we have it at Aurora Mountain. But coming from where our calculations have come into, we're looking to save about at least a third of the water resources that's used.
Okay, so that could be substantial, especially again in California. So apart from cannabis, what other applications for this machine would there be?
Well, it's interesting that you asked because when we first started the company, our focus was on food waste. We took a slight detour because of the cannabis legalization. We saw it as an opportune time for us to grab onto it. The thing is, because cannabis cultivators, they're well capitalized, and there's been a tremendous amount of interest from LPs in Canada and south of the border to use our technology. And so we kind of saw it as a strategic move for us to use the revenues from the cannabis industry to help us with the massive scale-up required for industrial food waste processing. And we're at the time where we now have a machine ready to go to Aurora Mountain and to really establish that collaboration with Aurora to be able to help us with the scale-up.
Okay, so in the food waste industry, like I go to the supermarket and I see them taking, literally boxes and boxes of lettuce and vegetables off the shelf once they've reached a certain best before date. So what happens to that stuff currently?
Well, that stuff currently, depending on different jurisdictions, ultimately could end up in compost facilities, end up in biogas facilities, or worst of all, end up in landfills. What we're trying to do is we're trying to establish a cost savings for our clients, where an on-site processing system which will eliminate the cost of logistics, to be able to treat the organic waste on-site and to have the effluent treated to a point where it can be safely discharged down the stream.
How much does a machine cost?
Right now, we don't intend to sell the machine on a one-off basis. We intend to lease or rent out the machine so that the client can immediately see cost savings. So at our current iteration, our product projected cost is roughly around $100 per ton of organic waste. It's a good number. It's not what we want to say as a ballpark number. Now, just to put that into perspective, a multinational hotel chain in Key West, Florida, has an organic waste processing cost of around $1,300 per ton. So even from that perspective, we already are able to establish significant cost savings for the customer. Now, that's not the same in all parts of North America. The same hotel chain in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, for example, would be around $100 per ton. So our goal with the revenues from the cannabis industry to help us with the scale up is to essentially target our projected cost down to around $60 per ton. And that would open us up significantly to industries not just in North America, but internationally as well.
So that would give you a minimum average margin of 40% then, I guess.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, so are there other applications for this machine and this process outside of organic materials?
We've actually had significant interest from other industries, livestock industry, agriculture industries, pharmaceutical industries, so the issues of opiates in the water. And these are all things that from a technical perspective, we can solve. Now, from a company perspective, the strategic opportunity available is really the cannabis industry, which is right now in the short term, everyone's kind of pounding on our doors to get our solution because we can take care of the active pharmaceutical compounds, as well as the food waste industry, and there's a significant food waste problem around the world. The other industries, we probably hope to have partners in those industries so that we could leverage the expertise in those areas for us to move the technology forward.
What is the nature of the technological innovation and what is sort of the IP profile around that?
Really the key critical part is really the proprietary blend of microbes and enzymes that's used to target very specific portions of the organic waste. Every sort of organic waste profile is different. And it's really taking a lot of effort to really look at what are the compounds and what are the characteristics of those, so to really develop that blend of enzymes and bacteria to target it. Machinery-wise, there are machines out there that can turn paddles. They can has pumps and valves, and all things are great. And we put that all together in a nice package, in a container that's ready to be shipped out to Aurora Mountain. But the key technological advantage is really on the proprietary blend of microbes and enzymes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, with these microbes and enzymes render the effluent, well, which I guess is more or less pure water coming out of the whole process?
Well, that's what we're working towards.
Okay, so would the end result be considered an organic effluent in terms of, you know, having no chemical toxicity?
Well, there's going to be two sort of waste streams that comes out of our system. One is clean gray water, which can be discharged into a sewer or be recycled back into cultivation processes. The other part is the biosolids. And there's, we've been able to implement some sort of the same sort of the technical improvements that we've made in the cannabis space to use on the food waste, where the biosolids, it's now at a place where it can be used to make a better compost product or a better livestock feed supplement product.
Okay, interesting. All right, then, so do you have an expectation that Aurora is going to use a greater number of these machines, assuming, of course, they're successful and do what they say they're going to do throughout their growing operations around the world?
That's correct. So we're working on the collaboration where once we prove out technology at Aurora Mountain, then we're going to install more units at Aurora Sky and other facilities that Aurora has and Aurora and its partners have.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is really interesting, and I see that we're looking at the stock chart right now that you're starting to get uptake in the investor side, and so we're certainly very interested in what you've accomplished so far, Alfred. And so we wish you the best of luck, and we're going to keep following. We'll have you back in due course. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Some new developments in the cannabis space. Justin Trudeau, 17 minutes ago, announced that he was expecting cannabis to be legal by October 17th, 2018. That's a pretty interesting development. So for the first time, we have a clear picture of when cannabis is going to be legal. And I don't know, I guess we didn't really find out whether or not that means we are going to be allowed to grow cannabis at home. Was that part of the mix? I'm going to count on my studio audience, or rather my online audience, to tell me, was that, here's an assignment for the online audience. Can you find out, did we actually manage to preserve the right in all of the amendments that were bandied back and forth in the Senate to grow cannabis online? This is probably a first. The online host, or rather the on-screen host, asking the audience for input on a question. I want to run through some of the other news stuff today in sort of commemoration of the idea that we now have legal marijuana. The senators voted to pass the federal government's bill with a margin of 52 to 29, with only 2 abstentions, paving the way for a fully legal cannabis market in 8 to 12 weeks. Well, we now know from Justin Trudeau it's going to be closer to 12. That ends 90 years of prohibition. 90 years in Canada that cannabis has been deemed illegal is finally over. I can speak for myself when I say that as a lifelong consumer, purveyor of cannabis, that it's a great relief, and I, for one, will be celebrating tonight in the most profound way imaginable. Canada is not the first country to legalize cannabis. Uruguay was first in July 1st, 2017. Uruguay's had some problems, though. A lot of the banks that handle the cash from pharmacies, which is the system through which people in Uruguay can only buy it now, a lot of those pharmacies were cut off from their correspondent banks and were thus ejected from the banking system even in Uruguay. That's caused a lot of cash to pile up in a lot of the pharmacies, and that's caused a lot of people to raid the pharmacies for both their cash and their medical or the recreational cannabis supply. It's a new form of recreational cannabis acquisition. Canada, however, is the first G7 nation to legalize cannabis, and arguably will act as the model for other G7 and G20 nations. Senator Tony Dean said, "Now we can start to tackle some of the harms of cannabis. The only harm that I'm aware of is getting busted for using it. But we can start to be proactive in public education. I actually spent a great deal of my education high and we can start addressing Canada's $7 billion illegal market. These are good things for Canada. Well, that remains to be seen. One of the things that I noticed in the bill is if a young person sells cannabis to an even younger person, they were looking at up to 15 years, according to Bill C-45, which in my view acts as a recriminalization of cannabis, not necessarily a liberalization or deprohibition. It would be a selective deprohibition. And it's going to be interesting to see what plays out among all of the illegal dispensaries in Canada currently operating outside of ACMPR rules. There's been a lot of sort of speculation on whether the government is going to use Bill C-45 now to enforce the existing black market dispensary crowd to either go out of business or otherwise become compliant. It's going to be a big question. Other items in the news today, the Senate had proposed, we'll continue with that. The Senate had proposed 46 amendments to the Cannabis Act. The Liberal government rejected 13 of those proposed changes last week, and including one provision that would have affirmed the province's right to ban home cultivation. Okay, so I just answered my own question. This is what happens when you're a one-man chief cook and bottle washer on the news desk in a given day. You find things out from your own information once you read it. Yeah, so looks like we can still grow marijuana. I'm going to plant my 4 plants tonight. Another significant Senate amendment that was stripped from the bill would have created a public registry of investors in cannabis companies. Yeah, that was never going to fly. The amendment to keep criminal gangs from using offshore tax havens to invest in Canada's cannabis industry. I'm not going to tell you why I'm laughing at that one. I'll leave that to your imagination. Another significant Senate amendment quashed by the government would have banned the distribution of branded swag by pot companies, such as t-shirts, hats, and phone cases that display a company logo. Well, thank God for that, because you can always make your own tie-dye t-shirt and put a whatever logo you want on there. In other news today, on this historic day in the cannabis industry in Canada, WeedMD signed a supplier agreement with Shoppers Drug Mart. Now, as far as I know, you cannot currently buy cannabis either medically or recreationally through Shoppers Drug Mart, though I guess by this agreement announcement that we are to anticipate that that is going to happen. Federally licensed producer and distributor of medical cannabis, WeedMD, entered into an agreement to become a medical cannabis supplier to Shoppers Drug Mart. Subject to Health Canada's approval of Shoppers Drug Mart's application to be a licensed producer, WeedMD will supply Shoppers Drug Mart with WeedMD, an affiliate-branded medical cannabis product. Aha! That's how they're going to get around that. Shoppers Drug Mart is going to apply for a license to produce cannabis and sidestep the whole growing process by selling WeedMD stuff. Kind of clever, very interesting. We already covered Aurora Cannabis and their spin-out of Australis, or rather their repatriation of Australis shares to Aurora investors. Valens Growworks, one of our favorite companies, has announced that they are going to enter a joint venture worth $75 million to develop prime acreage with a purpose-built, state-of-the-art European GMP-certified cultivation center within the municipality of the city of Armstrong. Phase 1, 400,000 square feet, but it's permitted for up to 800,000 square feet. Zero cash outlay for Valens, with their partner Kosha contributing 100% of land, building, and equipment costs. All of the hard assets will be split 50-50 between Kosha and Valens, thereby providing $37.5 million of net assets to Valens' balance sheet with no cash outlay or liability incurred. Valens Farms is expecting Phase 1 production of up to 56,000 kilograms per year of premium monocrop cannabis, primarily for extraction purposes. And the New York City Police Department today, I guess they're celebrating Canada's launch of recreational cannabis rules as well. They will no longer arrest people for smoking weed in public. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio on Tuesday announced that beginning later this year, city police will stop arresting people for smoking marijuana in public. De Blasio said that the overhaul to marijuana policy, which has been expected for weeks, will lead to as many as 10,000 fewer arrests in the next year. That move does not make it legal to smoke marijuana in public. New Yorkers, slow, but the mayor said that the police will issue criminal summonses instead of arresting people caught smoking pot in public. Well, excuse me, correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest downer when you're high after smoking a joint on the street is having to deal with a cop at all, so that's not much of an improvement. I'm going to talk a bit about the performance in the indices today, which are, without exception, reflecting the positive sentiment as a result of the final approval of recreational rules by the Senate. The main Canadian Cannabis Index, which is all 9 companies above $500 million in market cap listed in Canada, is up 4.43% at this point, up 300 points at 7072. That's its first time over 7,000. If we look at some of the constituents on that, I'm sure we're going to see even bigger performance. Probably the best performer in the index is Kronos Group, up 58 cents or 6.37% to $9.69. Canopy close on its heels, up almost 6% to $44.99. That's a new 52-week high for Canopy Growth Corporation. That is the highest share price for a cannabis company publicly traded in the history of public companies or in the history of the cannabis industry. So all kinds of history being made today. Organogram also did very well today, up 5.32% to $5.74, up 30 cents on the day. And even the hard done by Supreme Cannabis is up 8 cents today, 5%. Aurora Cannabis up 4.3% to $9.95. So without exception, the market is more or less embracing the announcement of the approval of recreational cannabis rules in Canada as a positive. If we look at some of the other indexes, they're all up. The next best performer to the large cap index is the Venture Index. These are all companies listed in Canada on the Venture Index involved in the cannabis industry. And if we go to that page, you will see that the best performer among these companies is Eastwood Biomedical Canada, up 27% to 24 cents. Not a huge dollar value there, but still nothing to sneeze at. The worst performer today, Vaxil Bio Limited. I've never even heard of Vaxil. Trading at 8 cents. Well, that's probably why. Arch Bio Partners lost 17 cents, down 11% to $1.35. Devonian Health Group down 4 cents to 36 cents. And so there you have the downside of the market. But what can I tell you? That's pretty much it for today. If you like our channel, you notice I have no co-host. The co-host seat over here is empty. Ed Molesky is golfing in Scotland today. Stevie Meisner has gone to Ireland to look at a Water Springs deal. That leaves me all on my own. I'm not going to monologue for another half hour, so we're going to cut it a bit short today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like us. Don't forget to tweet to us. Ask questions whenever we're live. We go live almost every weekday at 3:30, though the next couple of weeks are going to be a little light on productions because it's summer and we're going to enjoy ourselves a bit. And we're probably going to take advantage of the new recreational cannabis rules, even though theoretically we have to wait till October. We won't be smoking any until October, I promise you. Thank you very much for joining us. Come back and see us tomorrow.